Hello, welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be going through the best albums, I believe, from 1975. So not only is this a video about the best albums from 1975, this year, here in 2025, these albums are going to be unbelievably 50 years old. I had to think, because I want to say 40, but they're 50 years old. It's incredible. It's a lifetime has passed. The intentions of this series of videos, I'm doing 5 of them. This is episode 2. Look at 1975. Yesterday we looked at 1965. Tomorrow I'll be looking at 1985. You get it, don't you? You understand what's going on. You're not stupid, are you? Now, is this the best albums of 75? Not really. Is it my favourite albums? Not really. But in this case, it is. I think the one before I picked some albums because I thought they're very important albums to put in here. I haven't done this. This is my favourite. It moves around a little bit. I've been talking a lot already doing episode 1, so I've had to get myself a nice can of Pepsi. That is what we're advertising today for no money. Lovely. Are you ready to get, shall we get into this one? This is brilliant. All these albums are bloody amazing. So I'll talk about 1975 as a year when we get to the end of the video. That's the more boring, cultural, esoteric stuff. If you just want to know the list, let's just crack on. Shall we just crack on, shall we? So at number 10, I have Free Hand by Gentle Giant. Right, so that gives you an idea of how bloody brilliant the albums are on this list. Free Hand is at number 10. Right, the amount of albums I've had to kick off the list that I absolutely love. I felt Gentle Giant had got to be on there. Gentle Giant are they're like Prog's prog band, if you don't know. Absolute virtuosos, even more complex and tricky and do your head in than Genesis or King Crimson ever were. They have their own style of music. It's quite quirky. And also the thing I love about Gentle Giant is it's so groovy and funky at the same time. When they first emerged in 1970 with their debut album, it is very, off in the forest with the Pixies type of prog, the sort of thing everybody's doing at that time. Quite long-winded compositions, lots of all sorts of, excursions into a cappella bits and, the old mandolins coming out and flutes and all that bit. And they start to explore a style which they get better and better at. They probably reach their masterpiece level around the time of In a Glass House, Octopus. And then the world starts to change, and Gentle Giant starts to change with it. You can see in 75, this idea of how incredible future thinking and forward prog is starting to break apart. And that's something that you see here. And you see that the labels are a little bit like, well, can you write something a little bit more commercial? And Gentle Giant are undone by this. But at this point, they have developed their approach to the max. They're like at their peak. The band, John Weathers joined in 1972 or 73, I think. And John Weathers was I feel was the key because he was such a funky and straight down the line player, and he had the lack of ego to just plow his way through, creating a groove within this. This album is like a Gentle Giant album, but they're just pulling it in a bit. It's still immensely complex. It's still extremely obtuse, but it's obtuse in these much shorter, sort of almost like pop song formats, but there's no pop music on here. There's also the echoes of jazz rock fusion. There's a funkiness on this album. It's my favourite Gentle Giant album. I think they follow this up with Interview, which is another great album. And then they start to stumble, and before you know it, they're doing, Giant for a Day, which is pretty appalling. Although some people seem to like it now. It's going through a renaissance, that album is. I bet you, every time I have a cup of this, drink this, the adverts will come on. Shall we see if that happens? That's what I've got at number 10. I'm not going to say any more about it. Free Hand. I think I've done it its justice, haven't I? At number 9, I have Fly By Night by Rush. Right. Rush are one of the most important bands in rock music, in heavy rock, in heavy metal, in prog, and one of the most important musicians in bands in my life, without a doubt. When I was a kid, I bought Moving Pictures, blew me away. I thought it was one of the greatest albums, still do. I think it's a perfect album. My mum went up to Macro, which was this wholesale place that you had to have a special card to pretend you were like a builder or a plasterer and you were in the trade, and then you could go and buy stuff cheaper. And I used to give my mum list of bands to buy. And for some reason, my mum would not, I think it's because she didn't know what she was doing. She'd buy really interesting albums. And the one day I said, see if they got a Rush album. So she goes up and she comes back. It's incredible. She's bought Archives by Rush. I had 3 Rush albums. I had the debut album, Rush. I had Fly By Night and Caress of Steel. Right, so that was my second time. I hadn't got 2112. I hadn't got any of this. And this was just pulled apart. I just loved it. And I loved all 3 albums. And strangely, at that young age, I didn't differentiate the first album against the second album. I loved the first album. To me, I was into rock. I was into Zeppelin. It just sounded like that. It was great. There was some great riffs on it. But there was a definite change when it goes to Fly By Night. And this is when Neil Peart comes in. And suddenly they go full on prog. The drumming, amps up. They're now able to explore these sort of progressive rock, almost like progressive metal thing. And I think Fly By Night is a masterpiece. I really do. My head's getting itchy in this hat. Let's try it round the other way. So, yes, I'll look over that way so you can see the band that's on my hat. So, Fly By Night, I think, is a brilliant album. It really is. What does it open up with? Is it Anthem? Oh, I just love it. And Neil Peart, he comes in straight off. You just know what you're dealing with. It's got like By Tour and the Snowman on. It's got the Necromancer on. It's incredible. I mean, it's got some other tracks on. What else has it got on it? Can't quite remember now. The other tracks I remember from it. Because these 3 albums, they all mix up in my head. It's definitely got I Think I'm Going Bald. Now, I'm going to talk about this track. That's definitely not on the follow-up because that's the Fountains of Lamneth on side 2. No. So side 2, come on, you can pull this. It's got Lakeside Park, hasn't it? Think I'm Going Bald. They're all great tunes. Bastille Day, isn't it? Yeah, Bastille Day. And on side 1, we've got Anthem. We've got Beneath, Beyond, whatever that one, which tumbles away, doesn't it? Down the bank. And then you got Necromancer, haven't you? Or By Tour and the Snow Dog. And then you got... I think I've nailed it. If I've got that wrong, I can't believe I don't know the track list for that album off the top of my head. I think I've got there in the end. Anyway, Fly By Night, absolutely brilliant album. Caress of Steel, they're stumbling a little bit. I've always just thought they're just too stoned on that album. They're just away with the fairies, literally. But what they're doing there, sorry, I'm burping now. This is no way to do YouTubes, is it? But what they're doing on these 2 albums, especially on Caress of Steel, is laying the groundworks for 2112. And if they didn't do that, we wouldn't be talking about them. But for me, I like Fly By Night more than 2112. I really do. It's one of my favourite Rush albums of all time. Because it still has that youthful exuberance. And it has a naivety, which I absolutely love. And also, because it was done quickly and they didn't do loads of overdubs, when it does go to the guitar solos, it does that Black Sabbath thing, which just drums, bass, and guitar. And then you get all that sort of space to improvise, and it goes sort of quite jazz fusiony. I've always loved that sound, and I've always felt that when Rush do that, they're still doing it on moving pictures. It's one of the most beautiful things. I wish they'd done a whole album, they'd just gone in and just jammed on some grooves. Geddy Lee's big, fat, lovely bass. Neil Peart just grooving and putting all those lovely panoramic fills in, and Alex Lifeson giving you all those, juicy, slinky guitar lines. They're such a great band, weren't they? So that's Rush at number 9. At number 8, I have, by Weather Report, Tail Spinning. Tail Spinning is like the best period for me of Weather Report would be Mysterious Traveller, Tail Spinning, Black Market, Heavy Weather. That's the classic Weather Report for me. And Tail Spinning is in there. Sweet Night as well, sorry. Tail Spinning, it's in there. So I've done a whole, 2 documentaries on the history of Weather Report. You can go and check it out. But suffice to say, what we've got here is the band is touring a lot. They've moved from a sort of esoteric electric jazz album with Miroslav Vitous to a much funkier, and I want to say commercial sound, but it doesn't mean that the music's simpler, because it's not. It's even more complex. But Alphonso Johnson comes in on bass, and he has this funky, propulsive, virtuoso style on the bass, but they can't get the drums right. And when they do get the drums right, and when I say drums, I mean drums and percussion, and these virtuoso musicians are coming through, but it's not going well. And Alphonso Johnson's sitting there on a tour, which is like almost a year long in 74, 75, off the back of a Mysterious Traveller. And he's sitting there having to deal with all these different drummers. By the time they get to recording this album, they haven't got a drummer, so they have to pull in Ndugu. Now, Ndugu, I think, could have been the perfect drummer for Weather Report, because he does an incredible job, but he's a session guy and he doesn't stay. So he's in just to do this session, so we have a sound on here that you never hear ever again. It's a unique to this album. And Ndugu doesn't have to like some bloody fire under this band. And the sort of group improvisation, you know, we solo, but we never solo thing that Weather Report, you know, we're exploring at that time, they throw out the window. I think what's happened is the Mahavishnu Orchestra's come out, the jazz fusion's got very muscular. Weather Report aren't that type of band, but they can do it. Wayne Shorter can play and kill everyone on site if he wants. Same with Zamanul. And this is the album where they open up and they solo. This is if you want to hear Zamanul and Wayne Shorter, you know, blowing and burning, it's this album, Tail Spinning. And this is at number 9, because at number 8, I've got, you can't believe this is one of the greatest albums I've made, I've got Believe It by Tony Williams. So Tony Williams was the great genius of jazz rock. He was there at 17 years old in Miles Davis's group, exploring the area between swing and straight, the area between acoustic jazz and electric jazz, the area between the sort of establishment music and the music of a revolutionary 1960s utopian view of society. And he throws it all in, leaves Miles Davis's band, pulls this guitarist over from the UK called John McLaughlin, and forms this band called Tony Williams Lifetime, which is one of the sort of most challenging bands in jazz history. This is in your face. One of the loudest bands ever. People went to see this, like Herbie Hancock, and had their hearing destroyed. Larry Young, one of the geniuses of jazz, the guy that took the Hammond organ of Jimmy Smith and Jack McDuff and fuses it with all the electricity and fire of Coltrane. But he then goes into the 70s and seems to just not fulfill his potential. He makes some incredible albums. By 1978, he's dead, and I've never been too sure what he's died of. I don't know whether drugs were involved. He seemed to go into hospital to have some sort of routine operation and never came out, which is the same thing that happened to Tony Williams in 1997. It's ever strange. Tony Williams then seems, for me, to lose the plot. He does some brilliant work in other people's groups because he's one of the greatest drummers that's ever lived. But in his own solo albums, they're very, very strange. I know people they're fans of, you know, all these albums he makes. But a little bit too late, to be honest. 74, 75, he puts a new Tony Williams Lifetime together. And again, he goes to the UK and pulls another jazz guitarist, fusion guitarist from the UK over into his band. Actually, another guitarist from Yorkshire, the same as John McLaughlin, and he brings in Alan Holdsworth. We've got Alan Pasker, Tony Newton's on bass, Alan Pasker's on keyboards, Tony Williams on drums. But Holdsworth here arrives in America, and it's just ridiculous. And Holdsworth is dependent so much on the drummer that he's got behind him. And Tony Williams is almost like the perfect drummer. When he goes back to the UK and picks up a very young Gary Husband, who's a Tony Williams freak and plays with the same sort of fire and polyrhythmic energy, you see Holdsworth able to fulfill the vision he has musically, which I think is astonishing. But here, on Believe It, we have one of the greatest jazz fusion albums ever made. If they'd have made this 2 years before, I think we would be talking about this group in the same breath as Return to Forever or Mahavishnu Orchestra or Weather Report. This is one of the great albums. So that's what I've got at number 7. At number 6, I have, and this is a strange one, this is, because this album is low on my top 10. And it's interesting, this is. I'm going to have a contrarian opinion. Shall we have another, a little bit of a sup of the old Pepsi before I get into my contrarian opinion, just to build it up a little bit? So you got to remember, I've got this album in my 10 greatest albums of 1975. And so I love this album. It's one of my favourite albums. That's why it's on the list. I've chucked out millions of albums that came out in 75 that I absolutely love. That's not here. Say, for example, No Mystery by Return Forever. That's not here. But it is down at number 6, and that's surprising to me. It is Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin. For many people, Led Zeppelin's greatest album. If I was dealing with one of Led Zeppelin's greatest albums on this list, I would imagine I would put it up pretty high because I'm a pretty big Led Zepp fan. Again, I've had the Physical Graffiti on in the car for the last couple of weeks. I've been listening to it a lot. I've also been listening to the outtakes. For me, this album is brilliant. Let me tell you, this is out. So what I'm about to say is not a criticism. How do I put this? This is a brilliant album, but for me, it is not the same as the first 4 albums. It's not even the same as Houses of the Holy. Because what we have here is a patch together. Right? This is like Coda. Everyone hates Coda, but this is like Coda. This is like they went, well, we need to make an album. They got into the studio. What happened when they went to make this album? It's that John Paul Jones left the band. He buggered off. And they didn't know what to do. He'd left the band. Right? I know this because Robert told me this directly. He said, John Paul Jones left the band at this point. We didn't know what to do, so we started doing Elvis songs. And then Robert played me this recording of him and Jimmy Page and John Bonham, no bass, playing Elvis Presley songs, incredibly recorded with that sort of sound that you associate with Kashmir. It was incredible. Led Zeppelin know-it-alls will now be able to say, yeah, that's the so-and-so. I don't know whether this recordings are public, but I heard them, all right? So they start up, and a lot of the genius tracks in here, like Kashmir, Trampled Underfoot, lots of stuff that's on side 2, is, you could tell it's Jimmy Page and John Bonham in the studio jamming. So they get some tracks done, and eventually they coax John Paul Jones back in, and he joins the band, and I don't think anyone realises that from a moment that Led Zeppelin didn't exist. There was no Led Zeppelin. It was like, and then there were 3. So it's a really odd. And I don't know whether knowing this, I can hear it on the album. So I can hear outtakes from other albums. And sometimes you go, why didn't they put this on so-and-so? This is a brilliant track. But other times I am like, yeah, I can see why this never went on House of the Holy, or I can see why this never went on Led Zeppelin 4. I'm going to be honest. And House of the Holy, which is when they're at their most effusive. I've used the word again, an ebullient. I'm going to use the word ebullient as well. That's their ebullient prog album. They're going nuts. There's so much stuff that comes from those sessions. I know this album inside out. So side 1 is fantastic. And this is the other thing with it, is that for me, Physical Graffiti, if they had have brought out, this is a single album, the first album is just genius. But it's a little bit stripped down for me compared to House of the Holy or Set 3 or Led Zeppelin 4. And I have an astonishment when I listen to Led Zeppelin 4 of the way the band sounds. I can't believe how the band sounds. I don't quite have that with Physical Graffiti. But Custard Pie and The Rover, that's an earlier track. And The Incredible In My Time of Dying, which for me exemplifies the brilliance of Led Zeppelin as a band. It really does sound like they're just in the room playing. Actually, if you listen to the outtakes, you listen to the original recording, Page has overdubbed the guitar solo with something that's much more coherent. Flip it over, you got The Incredible Houses of the Holy, and you are like, why didn't they put the track Houses of the Holy on Houses of the Holy? Why did we get Jamaica and not Houses of the Holy, you know? And I love Jamaica. Trampled Underfoot, incredible, funky, driving all over the place. It's that Led Zeppelin sexuality, you know. And then the Sublime Kashmir, what can we say? That is really great. When we go on to the second disc, In the Light is a brilliant epic. I mean, it just goes on for a little bit. Bronny Ears sounds like sort of an outtake from Led Zeppelin 3, perhaps. Very nice. And then we get 10 Years Gone, and there's another, I can't even remember and that's where I start to go, oh, you know, they don't sound like they've got quite enough overdubs in, perhaps. I don't know. And then when I flip over onto side 2, This. What I'm saying is that we've gone from 10 out of 10 Led Zeppelin to about 8 out of 10, and it's a little bit patchy, and it lacks that coherence of being all in the same place at the same time. So that is my quite extensive thoughts on Physical Graffiti. An incredible album, one of the great Zeppelin albums, but it's never been one of my favourites. But it still gets on the list at number 6. But it's not as good for me as, obviously, what I got at number 5, which is a Blow by Blow by Jeff Beck. What an album. So Jeff Beck, let's discuss him. Oh, he's sadly missed, isn't he, old Jeff Beck? And I think now he's gone, we all sat there going, oh, God, he was so good. Everybody says it. Every guitarist I know, you start talking, and then you start going, oh, my God, Jeff Beck. No one can play like him. An absolute individual. And he was a pioneer of sort of rock guitar, a virtuoso, a free thinker, not a guitarist that was held back by the blues, but was able to take the blues and create his own way of playing, which was to be a singer of songs. Jeff Beck's one of those people that can sing the song. You buy a Jeff Beck album in the same way you'd buy a Frank Sinatra album. He's not a writer, he's not a composer, but he's going to play tunes for you, and you're going to listen to the way he plays those tunes. But after these first 2 albums, Truth and Bicola, which are like sort of groundbreaking albums, you know, doing what Led Zepp did before Zepp did, once he gets out there, I do think he flounders around a little bit, and he never quite finds it until he does this album. And this album, which comes in 75, his reaction to jazz rock. I believe he was working under his car, and Goodbye Pork Pie Hat came on by John McLaughlin, which is actually an acoustic piece. He goes and checks John McLaughlin out, which he would have been aware of. They were in the same circles in London in the mid-60s, but although I don't think they ever met. And he then checks out all the fusion stuff, and when he hears the Mahavishnu Orchestra, he's like, oh, right, this is it, right? I've got to do this. And what's interesting is at this point, the first Mahavishnu Orchestra is devolved, and in 74, John McLaughlin's gone back into the studio with a new Mahavishnu Orchestra, which includes Narada Michael Walden on drums, my hero, and the great Narada Michael Walden, and he's going to crop up on the follow-up next year, 76. He's going to be on a wired, not only playing drums, but contributing tunes to that. But for me, Blow by Blow is a reaction, to the funkiness of Stevie Wonder, who Jeff Beck was actually working with. He actually helped write Superstition. He's in the studio with Stevie Wonder while they're making this album. I've just remembered that as they go on, because Stevie Wonder also gave him a tune, Thelonious, for this album. So Stevie Wonder's about, so it's got this, if you imagine the sound of Stevie Wonder, the funkiness of Stevie Wonder, mixed with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And the thing is, he pulls in George Martin, which a year before was what John McLaughlin had done. He'd gone into a studio with George Martin, with the London Symphony Orchestra, and created the incredible Apocalypse. And I feel it's Apocalypse that influences this album. And at some points on this album, like on the track Scatterbrain, you feel like he's doing the Jeff Beck version of the Mahavishnu Orchestra with the full orchestra, with the whole George Martin thing. But the rest of this album just contains some incredible grooves with the great Max Middleton on clavinet and keyboards. And for me, it's Max's album. Max Middleton is the X factor on this album that just turns it into genius. We got Richard Bailey, who I think he's very young at the time. Incredible funky drumming. Now, I have put the feelers out. I've been chatting to somebody who may put me in touch with Max Middleton. And as he played on this album and then played on Wired, which contains my favourite track of all time, which is Lead Boots, I would love to get Max Middleton on the channel and discuss some of these incredible albums, along with some of the sort of huge pop tracks he's written and played on. Anyway, that is what I've got at number 5, is Jeff Beck's reaction to the Mahavishnu Orchestra and to Apocalypse, which for some reason goes on to sell millions of copies and establishes Jeff Beck as an artist. This is his biggest selling album. Bizarre, isn't it? We wouldn't be talking about Jeff Beck if he hadn't done this album. I think he could have fallen by the wayside without having a singer. It's very odd. This year, 75, is the high point of not only prog, but jazz rock. At number 4, I have got First 7 Days by Jan Hammer. Jan Hammer's my favourite musician. I just love Jan. I love him so much. He's incredible in the Mahavishnu. He develops a style of playing the keyboard, which I believe is the sound of jazz rock fusion. He embodies what jazz rock fusion does in that sound. And in that way, I've always called him the Charlie Parker of jazz rock fusion. He seems completely at home playing time signatures, exploring the Indian modality. And he's also in love with Jimi Hendrix, like all the great fusion players should be. And he puts Hendrix onto the keyboard. And outdoes any guitarist, Really, I just love him. He falls out with John McLaughlin, leaves the Mahavishnu in 1973 with Jerry Goodman, and they're the two nippers of the band. They're the two young guns. It's like when the Mahavishnu forms in 1971, they're literally 22, 23 years old. Think about it. Think about being a virtuoso musician, but only 22 years old. You're like a child prodigy, really. And you drop into this group, it becomes super famous, and then you pop out the other end. The two young ones who probably wanted to go off and have a lot of fun with Mr. Spoil It All, John McLaughlin, with his like white suits on and his vegetarianism and no drinking, and they just wanted to go out and have a good time. So I'm sure that it's that really that creates the dynamic in the Mahavishnu. Billy Cobham's Mr. Business. He's doing the professional thing in the background, thinking about his career. And Rick Laird's the old hand that knows John from the old days, and in the end, he'll play, but if there's nothing to play, he won't play. Once the Mahavishnu stopped, Rick Laird was like, I can't be arsed with this. If I can't do stuff that's groundbreaking, I don't want to do anything at all. It's incredible dynamic, and with me studying it so deeply, I think I got a feel for it. I'm chatting to the great Walter Kolosky, who is the foremost biographer of John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu. I'm going to have him on the channel, so I'm mentioning that now. Keep an eye out for that. So Jan Hammer makes Like Children with Jerry Goodman. It's a great album, and it's sort of a fun, youthful version of the Mahavishnu with lots of pop songwriting on funkiness, Hendrix guitar solos. It's Mahavishnu without the spirituality. Then he goes in, signs to Emperor Records, and he goes in and makes this album, First 7 Days. You've got to remember in 73, Tubular Bells had come out, which was this sort of one-man band. For me, First 7 Days is my Tubular Bells, because that's what Jan Hammer does in. He's got a little help from, I think, David Jones on percussion. I think Stephen Kindler might play a violin on a couple of tracks. But on the whole, this is Jan Hammer with his huge keyboard ensemble, and then his incredible drumming. I love Jan Hammer's drumming, making a sort of prog concept album which looks through the first 7 days from the Bible, but locks that onto the actual development of the earth. So Jan Hammer, he takes quite a complex thing here. I'm going to make an album which is going to discuss the whole history of the earth up until now, which is what he does, and he pulls it off. It's a beautiful album. It's psychedelic. It's futuristic. It's one of the greatest keyboard albums ever made. The sound's absolutely incredible. Jan Hammer had a touch in the studio, a way of mixing that was absolutely wonderful. But you've got to remember, even though George Martin produced Wired, another album where we see Jeff Beck running in Jan Hammer, but Jan Hammer actually mixed Wired, and there's a certain way he mixes, and there's a certain way he compresses the drums, which I absolutely love. Sometimes he can make the drums sound so full, but also he like does the opposite of compression, which is expansion, which actually has the effect of actually tightening the drums up and pulling them down. And it's all on this. It's all on this. First 7 Days, one of the greatest albums ever made, in my opinion. What could be greater than that? The only thing that could be greater than that is number 3. Is Frank Zappa's greatest album, perhaps, which is One Size Fits All. Zappa emerges in 1966, changes the music industry, creates the seeds of jazz rock, prog, avant-garde, heavy metal. He does the whole thing. The Mothers are very spiky. They're very modernist. Then he dissolves that and goes down the experimental route, exploring stuff with John Ponty, Hot Rats. Then he pulls in Flo and Eddie, and he becomes almost like a comedy group, talking about all, sex and farts and all that sort of. Not farts, it's those two have influenced me. Then some idiot pushes him off stage. He breaks his pelvis, I think, and he's stuck in a wheelchair for a year. And he starts to write, and he writes 2 of the greatest jazz rock fusion albums of all time, Waka Jawaka and Grand Wazoo. He pulls in George Duke, and I think he has an ear because, as I've said on this channel, he was always a jazz musician, although he never wanted to say it. He's got his ear to jazz. At some point, they tour with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. You can see what's the overwhelming band on my list, and their sound changes. And the George Duke band, which includes Tom Fowler on bass, Ralph Humphrey on drums, and then Chester Thompson on drums, John Ponty on violin for a while, Napoleon Murphy Brock on vocals and saxophone, of course, the great Ruth Underwood on percussion. I hope I haven't forgot anybody in that list. I feel I have. This is Zappa's greatest band. It's looked at so fondly. They make Apostrophe, they make Overnight Sensations, and these albums are just the brilliant fusion of Zappa's comedic, funny, funky, rocky, I'm a rock star stuff, and I'm an incredible modern classical composer exploring the edges of electronic music and rock music. And he does both on these albums. It's brilliant the way it comes together, and the band is able to deliver. And there's a joy in this band. The Rock Scene Elsewhere, one of the great albums. If you go and check out the Helsinki concert, one of the great albums. This is the last album by that group in '75. And it's interesting because Zappa, in his career, he's at a certain point. And now he's going to start not falling apart, but he's going to leave his label. He's going to start floundering, but there's a change. The journey from Freak Out to here, which is almost like a 10-year journey, results in Zappa basically putting down the cornerstone album that's going to sit in his catalogue and pull together all the other albums together. And the way it's going to do this is by dealing with his output as though it's this huge universe, and he has a sort of metaphysical theory about this universe, and that his output actually relates to the universe, in that the universe is made out of one great big note, and a metaphysics comes down from that, which explores these metaphysical, does God exist? Is there a creator? Ideas, but also lampoons it at the same time, placing it in the sort of modern cultural landscape of the 1970s. It is at the essence of what the blues has. This is what Zappa does. It's the sacred and the profane together. And this album is the cornerstone. And in that respect, it is Zappa's greatest album because it's possibly the best place to start. And if you listen to this album and then you listen to what he's talking about here, and I've talked about this album so much and talked about the sort of musical thing that's going on, but if you actually look at the subject matter on this album, it seemed to explore metaphysics. And it starts off with Inca Roads, which is perhaps Zappa's greatest track, but it's exploring this idea of USOs, ancient civilizations, were the gods spacemen. It's got all of that, and it's also lampooning it because of Eric Van Daniken, who came up with these ideas, as being a bit of a charlatan and making a lot of it up. And from this point, he sort of goes, what's it all about? And from that sort of highfalutin, we then go to Can't Afford No Shoes. The next thing, it's like about someone who's on the bread line, they can't afford stuff, life's treating them bad. It's like Maslow. I mean, Zappa is so heavy. It's so heavy, and people don't get it. This is the album. It's at number 3. What have I got at number 2? What could be this? Well, I tell you what, I was saying, I'm a jazz fusion guy. We're going to have Weather Report here. We're going to have the Mahavishnu Orchestra on here. We're going to have Return to Forever. And then I thought, if you take the Return to Forever as the whole, we have to throw in Al Di Meola's albums. We have to throw in Lenny White's albums. We have to throw in Stanley Clarke albums. So we're also in 75. I think we're getting School Days. It's absolute ridiculous. Why is it not on my list? We're getting Al Di Meola's debut, aren't we? We're getting Land of the Midside. Well, it's just unbelievable. Well, these aren't on the list, And the reason is because I didn't want it to be Return to Forever. Well, I've not got no mystery on here. I mean, what year's Leprechaun by Chick Corea, I believe? That's 75 as well. There's a whole bunch of albums. This can't be done. The rest of this list, when I was looking at 65, 85, I'm scrapping around for good albums. That's the truth. From my point of view, I'm scrapping around for good albums. When I get to 2005, I only did the top bloody 7 because I couldn't come up with 10 albums I actually liked. And 2015, I've come up with 2 albums that I like. But here, I could scrap all these and have another 10 albums that I would go, yeah, they're my 10 favourite albums. So what am I going to have representing Return to Forever? Right? No Mystery, School Days, Land of the Midnight Sun. No. It's Venusian Summer. And in doing this list, Venusian Summer, the solo album that Lenny White brought out in 75, I realised that this, to me, is one of the greatest fusion albums ever made. This is like going into space. It's like, these albums here, in 75, if we look at First 7 Days, One Size Fits All, the album that's at number 1, and Venusian Summer here at number 2, we are in the realm of the gods, literally. It's that last hurrah for rock music being the great psychedelic uplifter before punk comes in. It all has to do that. And Venusian Summer, which goes from these incredibly funky tracks, like full-on funk, to like electronic experimentation, ambience, and then full-on fusion, destruction. It's just one of the greatest albums. And who crops up on this album? We've got Larry Young on this album. We've got Aldi Meola comes on this album. We've got Larry Coryell on this album. It's just a hoe. We've got Patrick Gleason bringing in that sort of Herbie Hancock synthesizer thing that he was doing with Marwan Dashi, and that is on this album. But for me, the overriding person on this album that just turns it into a work of genius is the great Ray Gomez. Right, side 1 explores. It's very eclectic. We got funky bits, electronica bits, beautiful fluty jazz bits. Then you turn onto side 2, and this is brutal jazz fusion. And the opener mating drive with that Ray Gomez solo is one of the greatest moments in jazz rock. Now, Ray is still around. He's actually on my Facebook, and I see every day he's out there, always looking like the coolest guy in the world. You know, with his incredible psychedelic trousers and coats and the fringes, and he's got the beard and the hats. This guy is one of the guys. Ray is one of the guys so much, and I'll send him a message saying, you know, I've done it again. This guy is one of the guys. Now, I know that after being in obviously Ray Gomez, I think he's originally from Spain. And he was in a pop band, and they were very, very successful in the early 70s. Then he arrives in America, and he goes on to play Stanley Clarke's band. He works with Narada Michael Walden. He's on a whole host of classic fusion albums. And then he plays on some huge hit records in the 80s. His album that comes out in 1980 is mind-blowing. Go and check it out, and you can hear what he's doing on guitar. Jeff Beck then goes and takes and sort of copies on, and they're back. Ray Gomez is one of the greats. But I think 75 is when he came into the US. I don't know. He might watch this so he can tell me. And this was one of the first fusion albums he plays on. What's the guy doing? It's insane. It's insane. You know, and then you get this great long track, which is, I think, called something like Prince of the Sea. I can't remember what it's called, Prince of the something. And then we get a duel between Aldi Meola and Larry Coryell. This is one of the greatest fusion albums. So if you don't know Venusian Summer, go and check it out now. I've sold it enough at number 2. What do I have at number 1? My favourite album of all time. Let's have another swig of Pepsi before we get there, just to build up the excitement for this one. At number 1, we have Visions of the Emerald Beyond by the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I have spoken about this album so many times, I don't even know what to say. So I have commented on this through the metaphorical use of the belch, which seems a little bit disrespectful for this album. But I don't do it with disrespect. It's the greatest album ever made. It's an expanded Mahavishnu Orchestra. Ken Scott's produced it. It sounds incredible. You've got Jean-Luc Ponty on violin, Gail Moran on vocals and keyboards. The great Narada Michael Walden on drums, with one of the greatest drum performances in the history of drumming. We've also got Stephen Kindler, Carol, what's her name? Sheave, and this is my favourite album. Should be able to. We've got string quartet on there. Can't remember the other one is. We've got a brass on there. I think it's Russell Tubbs is on trumpet. Who else? Ralph Armstrong on bass, one of the greatest bass players of all time, really. They're just in the zone. They're all playing in the room at the same time, but they've utilised the studios very well. The album flows, so it's like just almost like one great big track, and it goes through these sort of eclectic moods, and it takes you out to space. And in with this album, by the time you get to the end and On My Way Home to Earth, when you get to that last track, you are out in space. And then he returns home, and returning home is like basically returning to a home you've never been before. It's because you've been transformed. This album is transformational. It's one of the greatest albums ever made. What am I supposed to say? You know, if you go and Google it, you can find a whole video if you want to hear me talking about the Vision of the Emerald. Beyond, I've done a whole video just on this album. Greatest album ever made, and I'm coming up to 40 minutes. I think I'm done here. So, we're done. That's it, 75, one of the greatest years of music. What's my take on it? What we're seeing here is that we're seeing the last, like a fire that rages and then reaches its peak before it blows itself out. What we're seeing here is this last flourish of progressive rock and jazz rock fusion. Now, what's interesting is on this list, the only album I would describe as prog would be Freehand and One Size Fits All. Prog is already diminishing at this point, and it's something I've noticed. A lot of the big bands like ELP and yes, they're all on hiatus. You know, Genesis have done, you know, Lamb Lies Dying in Broadway, 74, and they're sort of trying to get their act together, you know, and they're doing great stuff. Jazz rock is still all-powerful at this point. 76, 77, we're going to see the labels chucking money at it. We're going to see the release of albums, you know, by Stanley Clarke, Al Di Meola. They're going to sell millions of copies, but very quickly it's going to turn into Fusac, isn't it? So that's where we're at with 75. But yeah, these albums are all 50 years old. Can't believe it. I cannot believe it. I'm done. If you like this video, like it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. If you want to support me, you can go over to Patreon, where there's a ton of extra content, a lot. You can become a free member, and there's content for the free members, or you can become a paid-up member, and there's even more content for them. And you get access to the Andy Edwards WhatsApp, which if you're a music fan, you've got to be in, because it's just a never-ending torrent of incredible music, incredible chat, lovely people. If you want to support me financially by giving me a little tip, I believe down there's a little button you can press now and do it directly, or you can go to my PayPal tip jar. There's two ways of doing that. I have also moved my Bandcamp over to subscription, and eventually all the albums will be on subscription. If you bought this, you'll be able to listen to them. But what it means now, for the cost of basically one album, you can get all my catalogue for a whole year. And since I've created the subscription, because I don't like the idea of releasing albums, I am creating so much music here. I have actually released 3 albums since I made it subscription. So there could be 10, 20 albums out. You know, a lot of the music that I'm now producing through this channel will now be in album form. So, for example, the Christmas show that I did with Wendy and Pat, that's just gone up as a little album for you to listen to, and contains my brilliant rendition of 500 Miles High, you know. So if you want to go and listen to that, you're going to have to become a subscriber. I've also set up a Substack, and on the Substack, if you go and sign up, you can become a free member or a paid-up member. The paid-up members get access to the written stuff. I see this as quite an esoteric thing, but I am going to start writing. The reason I've made the written stuff paid is because actually I was writing stuff and putting it up on Facebook. And because my stuff is very political, it was causing me trouble. So I'm going to write the stuff, and if people are interested in reading it, then they can pay and read it. If I really want someone to read it and it be public, I will make it free, which I did with the last essay I put up there. But there's also going to be a whole ton of podcasts up there. A lot of the interviews that I have done on the channel are in podcast form, And that's mirrored on Spotify as well. So you can go on Spotify and listen to the podcast. So if you've got that, you're walking around, you want to hear me chatting with Charlotte Ponty or somebody like that, you could just go. The quality's not great because it's just the Zoom chats. But it's there for when you're out and about. So you can have Andy when you're out and about as well as at home. Or at work, which seems to be the main place that people actually sit there. They have these jobs and they sit in their office. And they sit there and they put me on. And I whittle away. And they seem to like it. Done. That was episode 2 of my birthday album series. We're going to move on to 1985 now. See you later. Bye-bye.